everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to day 4 of the Virtual Island Summit. My name is Ariana, and I'm a project manager at Island Innovation from London, UK. We're very excited for today's session, and especially looking forward to a conversation about how we can build community resilience and specifically the role of local government in implementing the sustainable development goals. So before we begin, we'd love to know a little bit about you guys and where you're coming from. So if you could use the chat for any questions, any information, but also we've got a poll that allows us to let us know you guys a little bit better. So we'd love to know where you're connecting from, what sector you belong to, and what industry you belong to. So yeah, if you could just start filling that out so we can get a little bit more familiar. Lovely, we have someone from the Seychelles, welcome. Switzerland, very nice. I think some people still just filling it out. Lovely, I think we will have the results of that soon, but without any further ado, I invite you to our session. I invite you to introduce our session moderator, Francisco Sindico, from Carbon Neutral Islands, from the Scottish Government Island team.
Thank you very much, Ariana. I hope you can hear me well. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today once again with Virtual Island Summit. As you said, my name is Francisco Sindico. I have 2 hats. I work in the Scottish Government. I am the Carbon Neutral Islands project lead, but I am on secondment from the University of Strathclyde Law School in Glasgow. We're running a little bit late, so I don't want to spend too much time, but this is a topic that is very much even at the heart of my own work, of my own interest. The role of local governments, so not the sovereign state, not the sovereign island, but subnational island jurisdictions or local authorities, governments, mayors, municipalities, in driving sustainability, in driving community resilience, with a focus on the Sustainable Development Goals. We have an exciting list of speakers. I will just briefly introduce them, and then we'll dive into the session. Our first speaker is Mick Tuisk. Mick is an islander by birth. He was born and has grown up in Saaremaa, Estonia. He was a road engineer. For studies, he had to move away from Saaremaa to the mainland, but as soon as he could, he went back to Saaremaa and has now been the mayor of Saaremaa for 2.5 years. So it's going to be great to hear from Mick. We then have Claire Ferguson from the Shetland Islands here in Scotland. Claire has a background in mechanical engineering. She joined Shetland Island Council in 2021, and ever since, she has led the climate change strategy team at the council in a very exciting development. She has developed the council net zero route map and the Shetland Net Zero Route Map and Framework for Climate Change Strategy across the Council and the wider Shetland Islands. And I must say that I have had the pleasure in my role at Scottish Government to work closely with Claire, so I am delighted to see her here in this panel. We then have a fantastic further speaker. Her name is Karibaisi Taoba. Karibaisi has been the regional director for the Pacific region at the Commonwealth Local Government Forum since 2009. It's a wealth of expertise. There, she has been instrumental in advancing the principles of local democracy and sustainable development across the Commonwealth in the Pacific. So her key contributions really include promoting strong partnerships to localize the SDGs and enhancing the sustainability of the region. Before joining the forum, Karibaisi held very important positions within the government of Kiribati, for example, including overseeing the Ministry of Internal Affairs. So she's really the perfect person to take us to that part of the world, to the South Pacific, and talk to us about resilience, sustainability, and SDGs. We have a further speaker who unfortunately has not joined yet, but if she does, we'll be happy to have her. Her name is Sima Dut. She's a Chief Executive Officer at the Savu Savu Town Council in Fiji. So without further ado, the way this works is that we'll have the three presentations. We'll try to keep them to 7 minutes each, and that will give us ample time for a Q&A. As always, do send your questions in the Q&A. Use the chat, as I see that you're already doing, to comment, to share your information, to network. But I will now give the floor to our first speaker, to Mick Tuisk, and the floor is yours, Mick.
Hello, and thank you for introducing and welcome. Or I would like to say hello from Estonia, from Saaremaa. I don't know if you know about Saaremaa or Estonia. Estonia is a little country on the northeast side of Europe, and Saaremaa is the biggest island in Estonia. I would like to share my screen. Hopefully it can happen. Can you see the Saaremaa map? Okay, it doesn't. Hopefully you can see now this card or map. Yes, I would like to talk briefly about our two main issues about if we talk about sustainability and how we can turn our energy and also our fuel to green. The main issue for Saaremaa is, or actually for Estonia, is that by history, all our electricity was produced in northeast of Estonia. But nowadays, when the offshore wind parks are looking to come, the offshore wind parks will be in here, and also the furthest project that is on the west side of Saaremaa. And due to that, we have to rebuild basically all our electricity grid. When these bigger lines became from east to west, nowadays they need to be turned basically upside down, and the power will flow from west to east. This is our main issue, and it is the national state level problem, but for us, it is a real big issue in Saaremaa that our electricity grid is weak. We cannot produce solar power, we cannot produce wind power or other kind of green electricity, and this is what we are really want to change. And this is why this local government, as me, we are really involved in our DCO, I mean the grid owner, that we are pushing really hard that they will start planning this and they will start building this, because if we don't have a grid, then we cannot connect any offshore wind parks, and for us it is a real problem, because us as islanders, we want to have this offshore wind park in west side of Saaremaa. There are two reasons for that. One is that we will get a bigger and better grid, and by that we can get new possibilities to Saaremaa if we are talking about computer parks, or we are talking about producing something that really needs a high voltage energy. And also this can be something that we can change our fuel consumption or fuel usage, because in Estonia we don't have oil. Every gas and everything is imported in, and also to Saaremaa. But if we would have this offshore wind park, then we could start producing hydrogen. And hydrogen is something that we see that this might be the future in Saaremaa as a alternative fuel to fossil fuels, because we have lots of ferry lines. The main connection to the mainland is by ferries that can be run in hydrogen. Also, we have some small islands that are connected by ferries, and that those ships also could use hydrogen. And nowadays, our public transport in Saaremaa uses biofuel, but this is nowadays a fuel that is brought in from the mainland. We would like to start producing it ourselves. This is our next topic, that we are nowadays planning a biogas station, a biogas manufacturing station in Saaremaa, but unfortunately it takes time. And this is something that we need, because we have really lots of agricultural developments in Saaremaa, and people are are doing lots of agricultural things, and we have so much waste that that can be turned into biogas. And by biogas and plus hydrogen, I think in some days, and plus electricity, then in the near future, we can start turning our fossil use to the natural gas. This is something what we are really looking into. But as everything else, we run into one big problem that is called NIMBY, not in my backyard. And it is basically the same thing of if we are talking about these offshore wind parks, or if we are talking about this biogas station. Everybody sees that, most of people sees that this should be done, but we don't want them in our backyard. They should be somewhere in the far away. And I guess this is the main issue in basically in every region. And in our case, it runs really much on the age level groups. Older people there are so many older people that says that Saaremaa should be basically a natural reserve place, that you cannot do anything in here. We just like to be just us and nature, but it isn't something that in the long term can be done, because if we want people to live in here, they need jobs, they need future, and this is why we are at the municipality level really working hard to get both those biogas station in here and also this offshore wind parks that starts from the grid. And nowadays, fortunately, state is planning this grid, and they are doing this special planning to build this grid, or first to plan this grid and then to build this grid. But unfortunately, everything takes time. It takes about 10 years from now to get this grid, and this is too long for us in our case. But let's see. Fortunately, state level has done this decision that they are starting to rebuild Estonian grid network, and this is basically, this can be our future, and this should be our future. But I'm not going to take more of your time, and I'm really pleased to hear any questions and answers. And I guess that our problems is basically same as other island problem. We are isolated, we need people, we need jobs, and in our case, we see that the green future will bring us also jobs and future benefits so much that we are really working on to get those kind of things in Saaremaa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mick. If you can stop sharing the screen.
Yes, right away.
So, as you said, there are potentially a lot of similarities with other islands and other municipalities, other local governments. So let's see if that is the case. I'll now give the floor to my colleague up in Shetland, Claire Ferguson. Claire, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Francesco, and thank you for having me as part of the panel today. It's an honour to be here, and I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the work.
I cannot see you, Claire. Can you put your video on?
Oh, it looks as if the video is on.
Can you ask Ariana if she can see Claire?
Hi, no, I can't, but I'll ask our tech lead, Jerome.
Okay, feel free to start, Claire, and we'll sort out your video.
Oh, apologies. Hopefully it'll appear. But yeah, so my name is Claire Ferguson, and I'm the team leader for climate change strategy at Shetland Island Council. And Shetland is the most northern archipelago of Scottish islands, and it's almost equidistant between Scotland and Norway. So here in Shetland, there's numerous risks that we're likely to be exposed to as a result of the changing climate. And some of these include increased frequency in extreme weather events, increased rates of flooding, ocean acidification and warming, increased pests, pathogens and invasive species, and disrupted supply chains, all of which will have an influence on our health and well-being, our infrastructure, our economy and environment, and are common across many island communities. And also with many island communities in Shetland, we're highly reliant on our natural environment for our key economic sectors. And for us, that is fishing, aquaculture, agriculture, and tourism. So it's therefore essential that we proactively act to address climate change, and that's both mitigation and adaptation to minimise the worst effects and to be prepared for a changing climate. We also have a wealth of opportunity, though, in Shetland, and we have a wealth of wind resource and tidal resource, and it's important to maximise the benefit of that for our communities. So Scotland has set a target of being net zero by 2045, and as a Scottish local authority, we have a statutory duty to work towards that target and to demonstrate that we're working towards that target. So we acknowledged a climate emergency in January 2020 and established the Climate Change Programme with the purpose to minimise the risks of climate change to the Shetland community as far as possible and to make the transition to net zero as beneficial as possible for the Shetland community. So at this time, a mandate was set to establish an appropriate and an informed target for Shetland Island Council to be net zero as an organisation, and also for Shetland to be net zero as an area. So this was the first step to acknowledge that, and then to determine an appropriate target, we developed the net zero route maps. The purpose of our route maps was to establish a framework to measure, monitor, and report on our greenhouse gas emissions. And to do this, we developed a baseline of emissions. We then undertook extensive stakeholder engagement across the sectors of energy, transport, buildings, business and industry, waste and resource use, and land. And this was so that we could really understand appropriate measures for Shetland in reducing our emissions. These measures were then modelled, and that showed us our pathway to net zero and what that could look like if we were ambitious, but also realistic about how we can reach net zero. This was a really interesting piece of work to pull together, and it showed us the scale of our emissions across various groupings. And we also wanted to make sure that this was a credible piece of work. So we scoped into it a lot of areas that would normally not be included in area-wide inventories, and this included the marine industry, aviation, and travel. So it was really important for us that it was reflective of the emissions that we have an influence over as an island community. And there was a few surprises in developing this baseline. One of our biggest surprises was the extent of our emissions from land, and that's predominantly from our degraded peatlands. So once we had done this exercise, we could break down our emissions into two categories: the comparatively easier to decarbonise areas, and this is where the technology exists and is tried and tested. And we know for buildings and the majority of road transport that there are readily available technology and that it's funding and resource that are the difficult pieces in bringing these actions forward. And then we have the comparatively more difficult to decarbonise areas. And this is where the technology isn't tried and tested, and examples are marine vessels and aviation, or where the emissions aren't from energy use at all, and that's our emissions from land. So it's fair to say, once we did this exercise, we could see that we had quite a challenge in getting Shetland to net zero. But the process was very useful to highlight the extent of this challenge. So at times, decarbonisation is made more challenging due to our remote location, our geography, our dispersed population, and our harsher climate. And we also have additional challenges of having the lack of resource and capacity to undertake the works that are required. Sometimes there's challenges with complying with accreditations that are set nationally and aren't fit for purpose for the island setting. And also, as will be an issue with many island communities, we're at the end of a national supply chain. So for me, that's why it's so important that we have strong partnership working and that we work collaboratively to find island appropriate solutions. And that gives us a stronger voice when it comes to raising our challenges at a national level. So the next step for us to build on from the Shetland Net Zero route map was to develop a Shetland climate change strategy and action plan. And the Shetland Climate Change Steering Group was established to do this. This group has been set up underneath our community planning partnership, and it includes all of the public bodies and trusts in Shetland. So the strategy is being co-developed through a systems approach in collaboration with stakeholders across Shetland, and this is to ensure that it's fit for purpose and has the endorsement of our local organisations, businesses, and the community to work towards the objectives. It will become the common vision for addressing climate change that all organisations in Shetland can work towards and use to develop their own individual plans. So mitigation and adaptation are the purpose of the strategy, but that's encompassed by the need for a just transition. And central to the delivery is maximising the social, economic and environmental co-benefits to the community. So the reason for Shetland having a kind of area-wide strategy is that much of the actions that are required to address climate change doesn't just sit with one organisation. It requires collaboration of organisations for effective solutions to be put in place. And all public bodies have a duty to address climate change, so this helps to avoid duplication of work and to streamline and accelerate our action. And also this aligned collaborative approach will help to increase our success rates at applying for external funding to bring forward community-focused decarbonisation projects. And we're already starting to see that. We're currently working on a project that is looking at energy and transport hubs across Shetland with an emphasis on the benefit to the Shetland community. So it's a really good example of beginning to put place-orientated projects on the ground with the community at the heart of the transition, providing the social, economic and environmental benefits whilst decarbonising. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals set out how communities, organisations and governments everywhere in the world can progress towards better lives for themselves and their children without leaving anyone behind. And all the SDGs have targets that are directly or indirectly related to the daily work of local and regional governments. Local authorities are therefore very well placed to link these goals with the local communities, and that's through local policy actions and also just being the catalyst for change. So the objectives within the Shetland climate change strategy have been mapped against the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Addressing climate change and reaching net zero is going to require transformational change, and certain groups within society will experience the consequences of the transition to net zero more acutely than others. And here in Shetland, we have a high reliance on hydrocarbons for our key economic sectors and for our lifeline services. We also have higher than average levels of fuel poverty, and that's because of high energy costs, harsher climate, and again, that longer heating season. So affordable, clean energy for the Shetland community is essential to achieving that just transition. And history has shown that areas that experienced poorly managed and unplanned transitions in the past remain disadvantaged compared to the rest of the country. And also that in times of unplanned change and crisis, the most vulnerable in society often feel the worst effects as they don't have the means to be prepared or to react effectively. And so this is why it's so important that all sectors of our community and our local businesses and organisations are involved in planning for the transition and in developing the solutions for the transition. So participation, co-design and collaboration are key. And if we plan this and we implement it in a way that considers all sectors of the community with tackling inequality and injustice at its heart, there are many significant benefits that can be realised from acting to address climate change. So that's me. Sorry, I don't think my video is still.
Thank you, Claire.
There.
Unfortunately, the video is not working, so maybe you can, whilst the next speaker, we can try to see if it works. But thank you very much for that excellent presentation. I can see already some similarities, but also some uniqueness. That's also the challenges and the beauty of working with island communities. Yes, there's an islandness, but at the end, also every island is unique. So let's move to a very, very different part of the world. And I now give the floor to Karibaisi. And yeah, let's hear from your own perspective, Karibaisi, about SDGs, sustainability, community resilience. The floor is yours, Karibaisi.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Dr. Francisco, for giving me this opportunity to talk at this very important webinar. My organization, like you discussed, like you explained before, is the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, and I'm based in Suva, Fiji. My role here is to work together with our 10 member countries in the Pacific, and our headquarters is in London. I want to go straight to what I want to talk about this evening, and this is about the role of local government in the role of local government in resilience for the communities. At the Pacific Urban Forum conference in Nadi in July 2019, the former Prime Minister of Tuvalu eloquently stated that there are no solutions that are not local solutions. He emphasized how important it is to create solutions that fit the the unique challenges of the Pacific region, considering its different cultures and situations. To make real progress in sustainable and effective development project, it is crucial to give communities a central role in making decisions. This means giving them the knowledge, tools, and ability to participate and influence the choices made by leaders. This strong focus on involving communities and finding custom-made solutions bring us to the important role played by local government. There are keys to make communities more resilient in these islands by working on sustainable development. Local government are the closest level of government to the community and possess an intimate understanding of their need. This proximity and understanding foster trust among the people who elect them. This trust in turn enables local government to support communities in the pursuit of sustainable development goals effectively. Local government play various fundamental roles in strengthening community resilience on the islands. They fulfill a fundamental roles in implementing the SDG through strategic planning, policy formulation, resource allocation, and community engagement. These sectors are essential for achieving sustainable development and ensuring the long-term resilience of local communities, especially in the face of environmental challenges. Now, let me share some of the examples of the practical work carried out by the Commonwealth Local Government Forum to strengthen community resilience to implement SDGs. Because of time, I will only focus on two specific initiatives, one related to the protection and restoration of natural ecosystem implemented in Kiribati, and another centered around promoting sustainable practices implemented in Fiji. Let's begin with Fiji. The Commonwealth Local Government Forum was actively engaged in a project titled Sustainable Urban Resource Management in partnership with UNESCAP and Nasinu Town Council in Fiji. Nasinu is a densely populated town faced with pressing challenges including unsustainable resource utilization, environment degradation, and waste management issues. The primary objective of this project was to put into action the 2030 Agenda, specifically targeting the sustainable urban resource management. This project was divided into two main phases, and phase one concentrated on building capacity in three critical areas: fostering participation, creating a solid evidence base, and promoting integration. To achieve this, a multi-stakeholders coalition was established to involve a diverse range of urban stakeholders. Additionally, comprehensive surveys were conducted with the multi-stakeholders to gather data aligned with the SDG indicators, and training programs on integration were also conducted. Phase two involved the formulation of policy recommendations by the multi-stakeholders coalition and the establishment of a resource recovery facility in one area in Nasinu. This facility was designed to encourage community members to actively engage in recycling and reusing waste materials, thereby promoting environmental cleanliness. Furthermore, it facilitated partnership between the public and private sector, contributing to the sustainable resource management practices. In summary, the project aimed to enhance Nasinu's capacity to implement the 2030 Agenda effectively. It achieved this through active stakeholders' participation, data-driven decision-making, and a holistic approach to planning. Additionally, the project efforts resulted in the creation of waste recovery facility and the documentation of valuable knowledge and practices for future use by National Town Council. Now let's shift our focus to the blue Green Development Project in Kiribati. This project is funded by the German government, and COGF, the Commonwealth local government, is working with ICLEI and KILCA to implement this project in Kiribati. ICLEI stands for Local Government for Sustainability, and KILCA stands for Kiribati Local Government Association. They are the local government association in Kiribati. Kiribati confronts sustainable challenges from climate change, overpopulation, pollution, and food security concerns. The primary objective of the Blue Green Development Project is to establish sustainable communities that can withstand the impact of climate change and pandemics. This initiative collaborates closely with 2 urban councils in South Tarawa, the capital of Kiribati. The project core areas of focus includes economic growth, sustainable urbanization, climate change mitigation, the preservation of marine ecosystem, and the safeguarding of cultural heritage. Importantly, the project prioritized inclusivity and actively engaged with local communities and traditional decision-making structures. The project overarching goal is to enhance the resilience of indigenous people in Kiribati by equipping them to adapt to climate change and pandemics. This is achieved through participatory governance, capacity building initiatives, and the creation of sustainable livelihood opportunities that empower both the community and local councils. In summary, the Blue Green Development Project in Kiribati strives to establish sustainable and resilient communities. It's achieved this by working closely with local communities and traditional governance structures, promoting economic self-reliance, improving food security, and enhancing ecological health in the face of climate change and pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karibaisi. And we now have the opportunity to have at least 15 minutes to have a bit of a discussion amongst ourselves. I do see Claire has arrived. Great, fantastic. And Mick, feel free to join as well with your screen if you want. So I do have a question, but feel free to put more questions in the Q&A box. Before I ask this question, let me just raise 2 points, which I think are relevant for this discussion. And I actually listen to this on a daily basis, even in my own work in Scottish Government. In an ideal world, decisions will be taken as close as possible to where the impact of those decisions will be felt. That's the whole idea of local governance. That's the whole idea of having a mayor in Sarima rather than everything decided from elsewhere. Now, that's the first point. So how to decentralize government decisions to the closest possible way to the people. One would think even in a city, but then even in a city, you may have neighborhoods that are closer to where the reality happens rather than the city as a whole. The second point is really about the added value of framing decisions around sustainability, climate change, social resilience around the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. We have heard it a little bit from Karibaisi and also from our other speakers. Whilst I get other questions, I'm just going to put in the chat, for those of you who may not be aware, the UN Local 2030 Islands Network. This is very much an effort, a global effort to localize the Sustainable Development Goals at the local government level as well. This is managed and organized by an organization called GLISPA, the Global Island Partnership. And it's really a good example that started in Hawaii, then Guam, and then other parts of the world, where the SDGs are used in a proactive way. But let me ask a question to all our 3 speakers. So Marius Panahon, thank you very much, Marius, puts a question to the panel. What innovative strategies or collaborations can island communities worldwide embrace to achieve greater sustainability, et cetera, et cetera? So whilst you think of this question, Mick, Claire, and Karibaisi, can I also ask you, and Karibaisi did jump on it a little bit, can you think of a concrete example, Mick and Claire, that is innovative, but also is very unique to your island? So a challenge or a solution that actually has Sarima written all over it, or Shetland written all over it, that may be somewhat similar to the mainland of Estonia, the mainland of Scotland, but actually that's really the islandness. And I think, Claire, you mentioned the word strong partnership, but also island approaches. So I'll start with the order that we had. I'll start with Mick, then Claire, then Karibaisi. That's the first question in the Q&A, but with this islandness added to it. So Mick, I'll give you the floor first.
Thank you. Really hard and good question. I don't know if we have any this kind of say succession in that field that we can say that Saaremaa is really on top of something like that. As I told before, our main issue is that we are an island as everybody else is, and we are isolated from the mainland. Actually, about on the last winter, we had one snowstorm, and some houses were without electricity for 10 days in 21st century. It is really our main issue nowadays is the electricity and this grid issue. And this is why I focus so much on this before, that we have this kind of problems. And also the other thing is everything to Saaremaa basically is imported, and we produce our own food and so on. But if we look at the energy field, then everything is basically imported to us. And this is what we are really keen to change, that we don't want to be so much, I would say this, involved in mainland. We would like to be more sustainable and more by ourselves, that we produce our biogas, and on the long future we produce our electricity, and also why not the hydrogen, and that our cars and everything should be run by the fuel or by the energy that is produced in here. And this is something what we are nowadays really looking, and hopefully in the next 10-15 years we will change our basically everything to green in Saaremaa.
Thank you very much, Mick. Claire, what about yourself up in Shetland?
Yeah, there's a number of, I suppose, island specific challenges that we come across, and it's a few that's been mentioned in presentations already. Mick had mentioned before about resource and capacity as an issue, and that's one of the things that we kind of find in an island setting, is that we know what needs to be done in terms of insulation to buildings and what the programme of works needs to be there, but having the resource and the capacity able to do that at the scale that's needed, we often don't have that. And then there are other issues that become island problems where schemes are set at national levels, and there are certain accreditations that you need to be able to roll things out that aren't fit for purpose on an island setting, or there isn't the incentive for contractors and people who have small businesses in islands to go and get those accreditations, which inhibits islanders from accessing certain grants and fundings and things that can help push forward decarbonisation. And then another area that we find, and again, it's just a consequence of our remote and rural location, is that market failure for private kind of companies to come in and take forward actions that you might take for granted in an urban setting. So our electric vehicle infrastructure is a good example. It falls on the local authority as the responsibility to roll out an electric vehicle infrastructure, because where in cities and urban areas you might have private companies coming in and putting in the charging infrastructure, that doesn't tend to happen. And also initiatives like car clubs and things where there would be the incentive there for private companies to come in and set that up. There's a bit of market failure on that island setting, so you need public bodies to be there to start helping to think of the initiative solutions to I suppose build up that base that base case for bringing some of these things forward.
Thank you very much, Claire. And I think Karibaisi, same question, but also focusing more on the collaboration. We have a second question from Sudash, where the question being asked to some extent is also, how do you forge partnerships. And you mentioned the partnership, for example, with ICLEI, with the German government funding. So I was wondering whether you can expand maybe on the collaboration side. If you're, in this case, I think you mentioned about Kiribati, how do you collaborate with international organizations, donors in a meaningful way?
Yeah, thank you very much. That is going to be very hard on the islands. As I mentioned before, we are separated, we are isolated from each other. So working together with one island is quite unique. And the travel between countries is quite difficult too. So the working together with partners is quite important. It needs to be planned properly. Like, for example, I stayed in Fiji, Suva, Fiji, and I think that is strategic too, because where I'm staying is where most of the development partners are staying and where most of the donors are living. So we need to have that kind of collaboration between us before we can go to individual countries to help them. And I want to raise it here that we have also developed what we call the Pacific Partnership, urban partnership, where we have a group of how many partners now? About 8 partners who are working together to help countries, to assist them in their problems. Because like you mentioned, I cannot do a lot of things with my organization. I need to partner with those who have the capacity. For example, when I talk about Kiribati, that project in Kiribati, I partner with ICLEI and also some of the organizations in Kiribati who are there strong. And also when I am talking about Nastino in Fiji, I partner with UNSCAP. So that is the main important thing that I think is very important in the Pacific, to have that kind of partnership so that we can pool our resources together and be able to help each of the countries with their unique problems. I started off with saying that there are no solutions that are not local solutions, and that is what is important, because each of those countries have their own unique solution. So in order to help them, we need to have a group of experts to deal with those problems. Thank you, and I hope I answered the question.
Yes, absolutely, Karibaisi. And there are 2 other questions that I will ask. One is about if you want data and science at the community level, the one of the role of youth. But before I get to those, just a wider comment again about local government dealing with local problems. What I'm hearing here is that, and it's almost, almost common sense to some extent, is that it's going to be, in this case, for example, Shetland Island Council, to know better than anybody else what happens in Shetland. Same thing for the mayor of Saaremaa and those working and living in specific islands in the South Pacific. The question then becomes, do you have all the powers, all the leverages, all the levies, if you want to call them like that, to present solutions, present those approaches, innovative, island-based, to tackle those problems? And I think that's where the puzzle sometimes doesn't work, because sometimes there is that challenge in, I want to do something, but actually the regulation prevents it, or the finance doesn't flow because I can't have access to it, and so forth. So this is not a question, this is just a comment from me, that I do think that when we talk about local governments, it's very important to understand the constitutional setting, the regulatory powers, the finance aspects. And once you have that mapping almost, then you realize which local governments are more empowered and which are less. But going back to the questions of our audience, there is a question about youths. So what are the place of young people or young islanders, either in the framework or in the decision making? So for example, here in Scotland, we have something called the Young Islanders Network, which is a Scottish government program for government commitment, which is really trying to put young islanders not just as a tick box, but actually in the process of decision making. So curious to hear whether within Shetland and Estonia and in the South Pacific, young people have a role with this sustainability resilience agendas. And the other one, which I think is very important and very challenging, is the one from Arthur Daw. How can local communities combine local traditional knowledge and local scientific observations to read their own local realities within the framework of the SDGs? And very big question, can we build local scientific capacity everywhere? So to give you an example, and Claire can expand on this, Shetland is not just one island, it's many islands, some of which are, in terms of population, very, very little. Some islands have as little as 30 people living there or 45 people living there, some even less. So it's just a question of scale. I mean, on some islands, there's just no way that all the capacity will be there. So it's necessary to work and collaborate with those, be it an engineer, be it a lawyer, be it whoever it is on the mainland. How can we provide that granularity, that islandness, if we don't have all that capacity on the island? So that would be my approach to that question. Very quickly to all three of you, the chance to just say a few words about youth and about local capacity, local knowledge. Again, maybe let's start with Karibaisi this time, then Claire, then Mick, and then I'll give the floor back to Ariana. Karibaisi?
Thank you again for that question. I think what we have been doing with CLGF, with our member countries, is to involve, when we go to countries, we involve all levels of government. And I discussed it before with the project in Kiribati, that we go deeper into the governance, the indigenous local tradition. You cannot work only by the local government. You need to have connection with national government, provincial government, and even the traditional leaders. You need to come together to be able to discuss and to make sure that everybody, nobody is left behind. In the case of the youth, they come with the traditional people, or even through the local government. They are always there. They are part of local government. So that will make sure that different people have different contribution to what is happening in local government. That is what we're trying to do in most of the countries, to get everybody together to work on issues, not only local government, but all different levels of government, with local government pushing it for them. Thank you. I hope I understand. I answered your question.
Yes. Claire, yourself from Shetland?
Yeah, so just on the first question, to say it's so important to have young people involved in the frameworks and the decision making. And when we were developing our net zero route map, we undertook a series of workshops across different sectors of the community, and young people was one specific group. Also people from low incomes and those who are likely to be most affected by climate change in the future. So it was so important to get input from groups into that, to make sure their priorities are woven into that. And then on the local input into these things, it's so important to have kind of the local stakeholders who know our islands feeding into the scientific kind of methodologies and what it is that we propose as our methods to reducing our emissions. And good examples for that is our marine industry. It's the kind of people who are working in the fishing, it's the people who are out there at the fore, at the kind of at the face of it, that understand best what is appropriate solutions to bring forward, and how do we represent those measures in what we propose as our methodologies for reducing emissions. And the same we found with the agriculture sector in Shetland, is that there can be kind of top-down methods and measures that would be suggested that should be done to reduce emissions, but it's actually the people who are working on the land and who are undertaking that processes every day, who know what it is that they're doing and what is actually going to make the biggest difference to them. So that's one of the things that we're really pushing for, and that we want to build that local capacity, that scientific base, that understanding of, well, what is it, so that we can reduce our emissions in the most appropriate way, in the most ambitious way, but also the most appropriate way for us as an island.
Thank you, Claire. Mick, very briefly, if you can, if you're getting to
Very briefly, it's always good to involve young people. because they are our future in Saaremaa, and we like to hold them in Saaremaa. And we have some collaboration with them, and it isn't so much of problem for us. And about this next question about this knowledge in Saaremaa, we are fortunate enough to have a branch of our technical university in Saaremaa, and they are now more and more focusing on blue economy and also on this, I would say, the wind parks maintenance and so on and so on. And one focus is also the sustainability in islands. And actually, we belong to Man and Biosphere, UNESCO Man and Biosphere area, and that why we know what we are doing in Saaremaa, and we love to be sustainable and so on. And we are also nowadays starting a energy agency in Saaremaa, which also gives us more knowledge how we can turn our energy production more greener and greener, and where this money stays, because there is not so much money in Saaremaa at the moment. We need extra money from offshore, basically from mainland or from Europe or somewhere else, the investors to come in Saaremaa and to invest in here. And also we want those investments to be sustainable. And this is what we are focusing on.
Thank you very much, Mick. Just give me 1 minute to wrap up, and then I'll give the floor to Ariana for the more formal closing. What I think we heard here are a number of things. One, each of the three stories from Shetland, from Saaremaa, from the South Pacific have a lot in common, but also they're very different in a way. Every island is unique. Having said that, the technology, I think, is there. I think Mick mentioned it very clearly, talking about hydrogen and so forth. What is needed are the necessary processes, the necessary structures, the necessary incentives. The question then becomes whether the Sustainable Development Goals can be a positive lever towards such incentives, processes, and structures. And I leave that as a question. We are at halfway the implementation of the SDGs, depending on who you read and what you believe. We are somewhere there. We're very behind. We're getting closer, but we still have 6.5 years to meet the SDGs. The last thing I would say, the SDGs, there are 17 of them. Not all of them are purely environmental. There's social and economic. And this is how I want to conclude this. If we're talking about sustainability or resilience, yes, we need to do it in a greener way. Yes, we need to deal with the climate emergency, but we also need to do it to make our islands more attractive, more resilient, and to, as I think Mick started out, providing jobs and creating a better future for the people living on our islands. Lastly, youth. As we speak, some of you may know, a group of Portuguese, they were children at the time, they're young people now, are actually fighting for their rights before the European Court of Human Rights. And this is not a new thing. This is coming up very, very often. You have something like a generational, I wouldn't call it divide, but definitely the younger generations, the young people are very, very alert to the climate emergency. And it's going to be interesting to see how much they can push and also how much they can use the power of law to make changes that maybe politics are not able to find. I'll give the floor to Ariana, and I thank all our three speakers, all of you in the room, for your comments, for your questions, and I look forward to being in touch with you throughout the Virtual Island Summit. I give you the floor.
Thank you. What a wonderful session. We've been so lucky to get some incredible insights from esteemed speakers from different corners of the world, from the Shetland Islands to Saaremaa to Fiji. So thank you to our speakers for your contributions, to Dr. Francisco for your moderation, and to the audience for your participation. It's these kind of spaces and conversations that are key to sharing important lessons regarding best practices for a sustainable future for all of us. For those who have missed we had a very sort of exciting announcement during our open session. Island Innovation is partnering with the government of Prince Edward Island to host the first ever global Sustainable Island Summit in Canada. So you can expect a 2-day in-person summit in May 2024, where we'll be discussing solutions and advancements in sustainable energy. So please follow the link in the chat that Maria has kindly put for more information, and you can use discount code VIS 2023 to get a super early bird discount valid until September 30th. I'll also put the agenda for the rest of the VIS sessions in the chat. And please keep up the important conversations. Thank you so much for your participation.